Elena Martinez had always been different from other hunters in her family. While her father Carlos and brother Miguel preferred wooden stakes and holy water, she carried a custom silver-loaded pistol that her grandmother Sophia had left her. The weapon felt heavy in her hands as she crouched behind the marble tombstone in Riverside Cemetery, watching the two young men who couldn't be more than 19 years old. The twins, Alexander and Adrian Blackwood, moved through the graveyard with an elegance that made Elena's hunter instincts scream warnings. Their pale skin seemed to glow under the moonlight, and their movements were too fluid, too graceful for ordinary humans. She had been tracking unusual disappearances in the city for weeks, and every clue led back to these two. Elena adjusted her grip on the silver-loaded pistol. The bullets were special, blessed by Father Rodriguez at St. Mary's Cathedral, and infused with pure silver her grandmother had melted down from ancient crosses. Each bullet could kill a vampire instantly, or so the family legends claimed. She had never actually tested the theory. The twins stopped near an ornate mausoleum bearing the name Blackwood in Gothic letters. Alexander, the one with slightly longer dark hair, seemed to be listening to something Elena couldn't hear. Adrian, his mirror image except for a small scar above his left eyebrow, was scanning the shadows with predatory awareness. Elena's heart pounded as she realized they knew she was there. Her father had taught her that vampires could smell fear, hear heartbeats from incredible distances, and sense when they were being hunted. She steadied her breathing and aimed the pistol, trying to decide which twin posed the greater threat. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the cemetery. Elena turned her head slightly and saw something that made her blood freeze. A massive creature, easily 8 feet tall with glowing red eyes and claws like curved daggers, emerged from behind a cluster of ancient oak trees. It wasn't human, and it definitely wasn't a vampire. The thing looked like something from her worst nightmares, covered in matted black fur with teeth that gleamed like ivory daggers in the moonlight. The twins immediately moved into defensive positions, and Elena realized with shocking clarity that they weren't the predators she had assumed them to be. They were protecting something or someone, and this creature was their enemy. The beast lunged toward Alexander with supernatural speed. With Trust Teddy, Elena watched in fascination and horror as the young man moved like liquid shadow, dodging claws that would have torn a normal person in half. Adrian circled around, trying to flank the creature, but Elena could see they were outmatched. The thing was too strong, too fast, and too vicious. Without thinking, Elena stood up from behind the tombstone and fired 3 silver bullets in rapid succession. The shots echoed through the cemetery like thunder. The first bullet grazed the creature's shoulder, causing it to howl in pain and fury. The second bullet hit its chest, and the third found its mark in the center of its forehead. The beast staggered backward, silver smoke rising from its wounds. It looked at Elena with those burning red eyes, and for a moment she thought it might charge toward her instead. Then it collapsed to the ground, its massive form dissolving into ash that scattered in the night wind. Alexander and Adrian turned to stare at Elena, their eyes reflecting an otherworldly light in the darkness. She kept her pistol raised, though her hands were trembling slightly. The twins made no aggressive moves toward her. Instead, Alexander stepped forward slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. Elena studied his face in the moonlight. He was devastatingly handsome in the way that made smart women do stupid things. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes were the deepest blue she had ever seen. But there was something ancient in those eyes, something that spoke of centuries rather than the 19 years his appearance suggested. Adrian remained several steps behind his brother, but Elena could feel his intense gaze studying her every movement. The scar above his eyebrow gave him a slightly dangerous look, and she noticed he moved with the coiled tension of someone ready to spring into action at any moment. Elena kept the pistol trained on Alexander as he approached. She had saved their lives, but that didn't mean she trusted them. Her family had been hunting vampires for 5 generations, and every story ended the same way. Vampires were killers, no matter how beautiful or charming they appeared. Alexander stopped about 10 feet away from her. When he spoke, his voice was deep and cultured, with the faint trace of an accent Elena couldn't quite place. Perhaps British, or maybe something older. "You saved our lives," Alexander said quietly. "We are in your debt, Hunter." Elena blinked in surprise. He knew what she was, just as she knew what he was. The acknowledgement hung between them like a sword waiting to fall. She should shoot them both right now, complete her mission, and return home to her family with proof that she had eliminated 2 vampires from the city. Instead, she found herself asking, "What was that thing?" Adrian answered from behind his brother. "A shadow demon. They hunt our kind, but they also prey on humans. This one has been stalking the cemetery for weeks, killing anyone who ventures here after dark." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had assumed the disappearances were caused by vampire feeding, but if these creatures were responsible, then the threat was far greater than her family realized. Shadow demons were mentioned in the oldest hunting texts, but most hunters believed they were myths. Alexander took another careful step forward. "Your silver bullets are remarkably effective. Most hunters we encounter carry weapons that could barely scratch a shadow demon." "My grandmother's recipe," Elena said, though she wasn't sure why she was sharing information with vampires. She claimed silver blessed by 3 different priests and melted under a full moon could kill anything supernatural. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," Adrian said, moving to stand beside his brother, "and clearly a powerful hunter. What family do you come from?" Elena hesitated. Revealing her family name to vampires was dangerous, but these 2 had shown no aggression toward her. If anything, they seemed genuinely grateful for her intervention. "Martinez," she said finally. "Elena Martinez." Both twins exchanged a look that Elena couldn't interpret. Alexander's expression became thoughtful, almost reverent. "The Martinez hunting line," he said softly. "We know of your family's reputation. Your great-grandmother Isabella was legendary among our kind. She saved more vampire lives than she took." Elena stared at him in shock. Her family had never mentioned that any of their ancestors had worked with vampires. The official family history portrayed Isabella Martinez as one of the most successful vampire hunters of the early 1900s, responsible for eliminating dozens of supernatural threats. "That's impossible," Elena said. "Isabella Martinez was a vampire killer." Alexander smiled sadly. She was many things, but toward the end of her life she realized that not all vampires were monsters. Some of us fight against the darkness, just as hunters do. Your great-grandmother helped several vampire families escape persecution and find safe haven. Adrian nodded in agreement. There are old alliances between certain hunting families and vampire bloodlines, alliances forged to fight greater threats than the conflict between our species. Teddy. Elena felt her worldview shifting beneath her feet. Everything her family had taught her about vampires being irredeemably evil was being challenged by these 2 young men who had just been defending something precious to them. "Why should I believe you?" she asked, though the question lacked the venom she intended. Alexander reached slowly into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small silver locket. He held it out toward Elena, and even from several feet away she could see the intricate engravings on its surface. "This belonged to your great-grandmother," he said. "She gave it to my grandfather before she died. It contains a message for her descendants, in case they ever needed to know the truth about the old alliances." Elena stared at the locket, her mind racing. Her grandmother Sophia had mentioned that Isabella had lost a precious silver locket near the end of her life, but the family had assumed it was stolen or misplaced during one of her hunting expeditions. Against her better judgment, Elena lowered her pistol slightly. Alexander took this as permission to approach and held out the locket for her to take. Their fingers brushed as she accepted it, and Elena felt an electric shock run up her arm. Alexander's skin was surprisingly warm for a vampire. The locket was heavier than she expected, and the silver felt familiar beneath her fingertips. She could see her initials, E.M., engraved in flowing script on the back, along with others. I, M for Isabella Martinez, and SM for Sofia Martinez. The locket had been passed down through generations of Martinez women. Elena opened the clasp with trembling fingers. Inside was a tiny scroll of parchment, yellowed with age. She unrolled it carefully and read the message written in her great-grandmother's distinctive handwriting. To my descendants who carry the silver sight, the message began. Not all shadows hide monsters, and not all monsters hide in shadows. The Blackwood bloodline has been our family's ally for 3 generations. They are guardians, not predators. Trust in the old bonds, and remember that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources. The silver bullets will know truth from deception. Isabella Martinez, 1923. Elena looked up at Alexander, who was watching her with patient intensity. The silver sight was something her grandmother had mentioned, but Elena had never fully understood what it meant. Now, looking at Alexander and Adrian in the moonlight, she realized she could see something others might miss. There was no malevolence in their aura, no hungry darkness that her family described when speaking of vampires. Teddy. Instead, she sensed protection, duty, and an ancient sadness. The shadow demon, she said slowly. It wasn't the first one, was it? Adrian shook his head grimly. They've been increasing in number over the past year. Something is drawing them to this city, something powerful and dark. Alexander and I have been hunting them, trying to keep innocent people safe. But we're not strong enough, Alexander added. Shadow demons are ancient creatures, and they're getting bolder. Tonight's attack was the closest one has come to escaping the cemetery and reaching the residential areas. Elena felt a chill as she realized the implications. If shadow demons were multiplying and growing bolder, the entire city was at risk. Her family's traditional hunting methods would be useless against creatures like the one she had just killed. What draws them here? She asked. Alexander and Adrian exchanged another meaningful look before Alexander answered. There's something beneath this city, something that's been sleeping for centuries. The demons are being called to it, and when it finally awakens, the shadow demon attacks will seem like minor inconveniences. Elena felt her hunter instincts screaming warnings. Whatever these vampires were protecting the city from was far more dangerous than vampires themselves. Her family had been so focused on their traditional enemies that they had missed a much greater threat. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Alexander stepped closer, and Elena was struck again by how ancient his eyes looked despite his youthful appearance. Because your family's silver sight makes you one of the few hunters who can see shadow demons clearly. Most supernatural hunters can't track them effectively. And because... He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. Because what? Elena pressed. Adrian answered for his brother. Because the old prophecies speak of a Martinez descendant who will stand with the Blackwood bloodline when the ancient evil finally rises. Someone who will fire the silver shot that either saves or dooms us all. Elena felt her breath catch in her throat. Prophecies were mentioned in the oldest hunting texts, but her family had always treated them as folklore rather than fact. The idea that she might be part of some predetermined fate was both terrifying and thrilling. I need to think about this, she said, stepping backward toward the cemetery gate. I need to research my family's records, talk to my grandmother. Alexander nodded understandingly. We'll be here tomorrow night and every night after that, hunting shadow demons and trying to keep people safe. When you're ready to learn more, you'll know where to find us. Elena turned to leave, then paused and looked back at the twins. If I discover you've lied to me about any of this, you'll use those silver bullets exactly as your family trained you to. Alexander finished with a slight smile. We wouldn't expect anything less from a Martinez hunter. Elena walked away from the cemetery with her mind spinning. Everything she thought she knew about her family's history was being rewritten. The silver locket felt warm against her palm, and she could almost feel her great-grandmother's presence guiding her toward a truth that had been hidden for decades. As she reached her car, Elena turned back to look at the cemetery one more time. Alexander and Adrian had vanished, but somehow she knew they were still watching over the grounds, protecting innocent people from threats that most humans couldn't even imagine. Elena drove home through the empty streets, her grandmother's silver pistol resting on the passenger seat beside Isabella's locket. Tomorrow she would begin researching the true history of the Martinez family and their connection to the Blackwood vampires. Tonight, she had killed her first shadow demon and possibly found allies in the most unlikely place. The prophecy Adrian had mentioned echoed in her mind as she pulled into her driveway. A silver shot that would either save or doom them all. Elena touched the locket hanging around her neck and wondered if she was strong enough for whatever destiny awaited her in the shadows of Riverside Cemetery. 3 days after her encounter with Alexander and Adrian Blackwood, Elena sat in her grandmother Sophia's living room, surrounded by dusty leather journals and faded photographs. The old woman had initially been reluctant to discuss family secrets, but the sight of Isabella's locket had broken down decades of careful silence. Elena studied a photograph dated 1922 that showed her great-grandmother standing beside a tall, distinguished man with familiar blue eyes. The resemblance between this man and Alexander was unmistakable, though the photograph was over a century old. "That's Marcus Blackwood," Sophia said, settling into her favorite armchair with a cup of tea. Alexander and Adrian's grandfather. Isabella saved his life during the Great Vampire Purge of 1922, and in return he helped her hunt the creatures that were truly dangerous to humans. Teddy. Elena looked up from the photograph. Why did our family keep this secret? Why let everyone believe vampires were all monsters? Sophia sighed deeply, her weathered hands smoothing the fabric of her shawl. Because the world wasn't ready for the truth, mija. It still isn't. Most vampires are monsters, feeding on innocent people and spreading darkness wherever they go. But some bloodlines, ancient ones like the Blackwoods, chose a different path centuries ago. What made them different? Elena asked, genuinely curious. They feed on the life force of evil creatures instead of human blood, Sophia explained. Shadow demons, rogue vampires, dark spirits. It's why they're so effective at hunting supernatural threats. Each kill makes them stronger, but it also binds them to protect the innocent. Elena thought about Alexander and Adrian, how they had moved with such lethal grace when fighting the shadow demon. If they gained power from destroying evil creatures, then their presence in the cemetery made perfect sense. "Tell me about the prophecy," Elena said, opening one of Isabella's journals to a page marked with pressed flowers. Sophia's expression grew serious. "The ancient texts speak of a time when something called the Shadow Heart will awaken beneath our city. It's been sleeping for over 1,000 years, but dark magic has been slowly stirring it back to consciousness." Elena found the passage she was looking for and read aloud. "When the Shadow Heart beats with stolen life, the silver-blessed daughter of Martinez blood will stand with the twin guardians of the Blackwood line. Her shot will either bind the darkness forever or release it to consume the world." The word sent a chill through Elena's body. The responsibility implied in the prophecy was staggering, but she was beginning to understand why her family had maintained their alliance with certain vampire bloodlines. "Abuela," Elena said softly, "do you really believe I'm the one mentioned in the prophecy?" Sophia reached over and touched Elena's cheek with gentle fingers. "You were born with the silver sight. Just like Isabella and myself, you can see the true nature of supernatural creatures, beyond their physical forms. And you're the first Martinez in 3 generations to successfully kill a shadow demon." Elena nodded slowly. The silver sight explained why she had been able to perceive that Alexander and Adrian weren't malevolent despite being vampires. It also explained why the shadow demon had seemed so clearly monstrous to her, while other family members often struggled to identify supernatural threats accurately. "I need to see them again," Elena said, making her decision. "If this shadow heart is really awakening, then we need to work together to stop it." Sophia smiled proudly. "Isabella would be proud of you, mija. But be careful. The Blackwood twins may be allies, but they're still vampires. Dangerous, especially the older one." "Alexander?" Elena asked, surprised. He seemed less aggressive than Adrian. Marcus warned Isabella that his eldest grandson would be the most powerful vampire of his generation, Sophia said. Alexander has been alive for over 200 years, though he appears young. His brother Adrian is only 50 years old, still practically a child by vampire standards. Elena stared at her grandmother in shock. Alexander looked no older than 20, but he had been alive for 2 centuries. The implications of his age and experience made their previous encounter even more significant. An ancient vampire had treated her as an equal, had shared secrets and shown vulnerability. That evening, Elena returned to Riverside Cemetery with her grandmother's silver pistol and a renewed sense of purpose. She had spent hours studying Isabella's journals and maps of the underground tunnel system that ran beneath the city. If the Shadowheart was hidden somewhere underground, then the tunnels would be the most likely location. She found Alexander and Adrian near the same mausoleum where they had first encountered the Shadow Demon. They weren't alone this time. 3 other figures stood with them, all clearly vampires based on their supernatural stillness and pale skin. Elena approached cautiously, her hand resting on her pistol but not drawing it. Alexander noticed her first and stepped forward with a welcoming smile that made her heart skip a beat. "Elena," he said warmly, "I wasn't certain you would return. I've been researching my family's history," she replied. "I know about the Alliance now, and about the Shadowheart." Adrian nodded approvingly. "Then you understand why we need your help." Alexander gestured toward his companions. "Allow me to introduce my cousin Victoria Blackwood and our allies Thomas and Sarah Chen." Victoria was a striking woman who appeared to be in her 30s, with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes. The Chen siblings looked like twins themselves, both Asian with sharp features and an air of deadly competence. "Elena Martinez," Victoria said thoughtfully. "We've heard stories about your family for generations. Your great-grandmother was remarkable. We've been tracking shadow demon activity throughout the city," Thomas Chen explained. "The attacks are escalating and they're moving closer to populated areas." Sarah Chen spread a detailed map across the top of a nearby tombstone. "We've identified 7 locations where demons have emerged over the past month. They're all connected to entry points for the old tunnel system." Elena studied the map carefully. The pattern was clear once she knew what to look for. The shadow demons were emerging from underground, following the ancient tunnels that led toward the center of the city. "The Shadowheart is directly beneath City Hall," she said, recognizing the pattern from Isabella's maps. "These tunnels were built around it, probably to contain it." Alexander nodded grimly. "We reached the same conclusion, but the binding spells that have kept it asleep for centuries are weakening. Each shadow demon that manifests draws more power from the Shadowheart." Elena felt a chill as she realized the implications. How many more can emerge before the Shadowheart fully awakens? "Based on the escalating pattern, we estimate no more than a week," Victoria said. "After that, we'll be facing something far more dangerous than shadow demons." Elena thought about the prophecy, about the silver shot that would either save or doom them all. What happens if the Shadowheart fully awakens? The vampires exchanged grim looks before Adrian answered. "Every evil creature within 1,000 miles will be drawn to its power. Demons, rogue vampires, dark spirits, things that haven't been seen in centuries. The city will become a supernatural war zone. And if that happens," Alexander added quietly, "the human authorities will eventually notice. The secret existence of our kinds will be exposed, and the resulting panic and persecution will destroy innocent supernatural creatures along with the guilty." Elena understood the stakes now. This wasn't just about protecting the city from supernatural threats. It was about preserving the delicate balance that allowed vampires like the Blackwoods to exist peacefully alongside humans. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Thomas Chen pointed to a specific location on the map. "There's an entrance to the tunnel system here, in the basement of an abandoned warehouse. We need someone with the silver sight to guide us through the tunnels and identify the exact location of the Shadowheart." Most of us can sense its general presence, Sarah added, but the underground interference makes precise location difficult. Your ability should cut through that interference. Elena nodded. Though the thought of venturing into dark tunnels filled with supernatural dangers was terrifying. When do we go? Tonight, Alexander said. Every hour we wait, the shadow heart grows stronger. Elena checked her pistol and the supply of silver bullets her grandmother had given her. She also carried several silver crosses and a small bottle of holy water, though she wasn't certain how effective traditional vampire deterrents would be against creatures that fed on evil rather than human blood. Alexander approached her as the others prepared their weapons. Elena, I want you to know that what we're about to do is extremely dangerous. If you choose to leave now, no one would blame you. Elena looked into his ancient blue eyes and saw genuine concern for her safety. The realization that a 200-year-old vampire was worried about her welfare was both touching and unsettling. My family has been protecting people from supernatural threats for generations, she said firmly. This is what we do. Alexander smiled, and Elena felt her breath catch. When he looked at her like that, it was easy to forget he was a vampire and focus only on how devastatingly attractive he was. Your great-grandmother would be proud, he said softly. The warehouse was located in an industrial district that had been largely abandoned after the economic downturn of the previous decade. Elena followed the vampires through broken windows and around rusted machinery, using her silver sight to scan for supernatural threats. The basement entrance was hidden behind a false wall that Victoria moved aside with supernatural strength. Beyond it lay a stone staircase that descended into complete darkness. The air rising from the tunnels was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else Elena couldn't identify. Alexander produced a flashlight and handed it to Elena. Your eyes will adjust quickly, but human vision is limited in absolute darkness. Elena accepted the flashlight gratefully and followed the vampires down the stone steps. The tunnel system was older than she had expected, with carved stone walls and archways that looked medieval. Her family's maps had indicated the tunnels were built in the 1800s, but these passages looked much older. These predate the official city records. Adrian confirmed when she mentioned her observation. The tunnels were built around something that was already here. They moved through the tunnels in single file, with Alexander leading and Elena in the center of the group where she would be most protected. The vampires moved with perfect silence, their supernatural senses alert for any sign of danger. With trust Teddy, Elena used her silver sight to scan the darkness ahead of them. The further they descended, the stronger the sense of ancient evil became. It was like walking toward the heart of a nightmare, feeling the malevolent presence grow stronger with each step. After what felt like hours, they reached a circular chamber with 7 tunnel entrances branching off in different directions. Elena immediately knew this was significant. Her silver sight showed her energy patterns flowing from 6 of the tunnels toward the 7th, which led deeper underground. That one, she said, pointing toward the central tunnel. The Shadow Heart is directly below us, but we need to follow that passage. Alexander nodded and led them down the indicated tunnel. The passage sloped steeply downward, and Elena could feel the weight of the earth above them. The sense of ancient evil was becoming almost overwhelming, pressing against her consciousness like a physical force. Suddenly, Sarah Chen held up a hand for silence. Elena strained her ears and heard what had caught the vampire's attention. Footsteps echoed from somewhere ahead of them, accompanied by voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize. Victoria drew a pair of silver daggers from beneath her coat. Cultists. They must be trying to accelerate the awakening process. Elena felt her heart rate increase. Dealing with shadow demons was frightening enough, but human cultists working dark magic added a new level of danger to their mission. Alexander turned to face the group. We need to stop them before they can complete whatever ritual they're attempting. Elena, stay close to me. If anything happens to me, Adrian will get you safely out of here. Elena wanted to protest that she could take care of herself, but she understood the tactical reality. In a fight against supernatural forces, she was the weakest member of their group despite her silver weapons. They moved forward more cautiously, using the tunnel walls for cover as they approached the source of the voices. Elena could see flickering light ahead, and the scent in the air grew stronger. Now she could identify it, the smell of burning herbs and something metallic that made her stomach turn. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, dominated by a massive stone altar. Elena estimated the space was at least the size of a cathedral, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into darkness above their heads. The walls were covered with carved symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the torchlight. At the center of the chamber, directly beneath the altar, Elena could see the source of all their problems. The Shadow Heart was a crystalline structure about the size of a human heart, but it pulsed with dark energy that made her silver sight scream warnings. Around it, dozens of robed figures chanted in an ancient language while pouring what looked like blood into channels carved in the stone floor. Elena realized with horror that the cultists were using human sacrifices to feed power to the Shadow Heart. Several bodies lay motionless around the altar, and she could see that at least some of the victims were still alive but unconscious. Alexander's expression was grim as he surveyed the scene. "We're too late to prevent the ritual, but we might be able to disrupt it before the Shadow Heart fully awakens." Elena checked her pistol and counted the silver bullets. She had enough ammunition to make a significant impact, but the number of cultists was overwhelming. Even with 5 vampires fighting alongside her, the odds were not favorable. "What's the plan?" she whispered. "We create enough chaos to reach the altar," Victoria said. "If we can destroy the Shadow Heart before the ritual is complete, the shadow demons will lose their power source and disappear." Adrian pointed toward the crystalline heart. "Elena, your silver bullets should be able to damage it, but you'll need to get close enough for an accurate shot." Elena felt the weight of the prophecy settling on her shoulders. This was the moment Isabella's vision had predicted, when a Martinez descendant would fire the silver shot that determined the fate of the city. Alexander touched her arm gently. "Remember, the bullets know truth from deception. Trust in your family's magic." Elena nodded, drew her pistol, and prepared to fulfill her destiny. The battle erupted with supernatural violence as Alexander and his cousins launched themselves into the chamber. Elena had never witnessed vampires fighting at full strength before, and the display of speed and power was breathtaking. They moved like deadly shadows, striking down cultists with lethal precision while deflecting magical attacks that would have killed ordinary humans. Elena followed close behind Alexander, her silver sight guiding her through the chaos toward the pulsing Shadow Heart. The crystalline structure was growing brighter with each passing moment, fed by the blood flowing through the carved channels. She could see that several of the sacrificial victims were children, and rage fueled her determination to stop the ritual. A robed cultist stepped into her path, raising a curved dagger that gleamed with dark enchantments. Elena didn't hesitate. She put 2 silver bullets center mass, and the cultist collapsed as silver fire consumed his body from within. The blessed ammunition was even more effective against dark magic users than she had hoped. Alexander appeared at her side, his fangs extended and his eyes glowing with predatory light. There was blood on his shirt, but Elena could tell it wasn't his own. He had just torn through a group of cultists with terrifying efficiency. "The ritual is almost complete," he shouted over the sounds of battle. "You need to shoot the Shadow Heart now before it reaches full power." Elena raised her pistol and aimed at the crystalline heart, but hesitated as she realized the implications. If she missed or if her bullets weren't powerful enough to destroy it, then the Shadow Heart would awaken and the city would be doomed. The prophecy spoke of a shot that would either save or doom them all, and she was about to discover which outcome awaited them. A shadow demon materialized directly in front of Elena, its claws reaching for her throat. Before she could react, Adrian Blackwood intercepted the creature with supernatural speed. He grabbed the demon by its neck and twisted sharply, destroying it with his bare hands. The exertion left him breathing hard, and Elena realized that even vampires had limits when fighting multiple supernatural threats. "Elena, now!" Victoria Blackwood screamed from across the chamber, where she was locked in combat with 3 cultists who were wielding weapons that crackled with dark energy. "Witch!" Elena steadied her aim and fired 3 silver bullets in rapid succession at the Shadowheart. The first bullet struck the crystalline surface and sent cracks spiderwebbing across its face. The second bullet widened the cracks, and dark energy began leaking from the structure like blood. The third bullet found the exact center of the heart and shattered it completely. The destruction of the Shadowheart sent a shockwave of energy throughout the chamber that knocked everyone to their knees. The remaining shadow demons dissolved into ash, and several of the cultists began screaming as the dark magic that had been enhancing their abilities turned on them. Elena watched in fascination and horror as the evil energy that had been contained within the Shadowheart began consuming its former servants. Alexander struggled to his feet and helped Elena stand. Around them, the surviving cultists were fleeing through the various tunnel entrances, abandoning their dead and wounded. The immediate threat was over, but Elena could see that several of the sacrificial victims needed immediate medical attention. "Thomas, Sarah, help me get these people to safety," Alexander ordered. "Victoria, contact our allies in the city government. We need medical teams down here immediately, and we need this location sealed permanently." Elena holstered her pistol and moved to check on the victims. Most were unconscious but breathing, though several had lost significant amounts of blood. A young girl who couldn't be more than 16 was stirring to consciousness, and Elena knelt beside her to offer comfort. "You're safe now," Elena said softly. "The bad people are gone." The girl looked up at Elena with wide, frightened eyes. "Are you an angel?" she whispered. Elena smiled sadly. "No, sweetheart, just someone who cares about protecting innocent people." Alexander appeared beside them and gently lifted the girl in his arms. Despite his supernatural nature, he handled her with incredible tenderness. Elena realized that his protective instincts were genuine, not an act designed to manipulate her trust. "We'll get you to a hospital," he told the girl. "You're going to be fine." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. True to Alexander's word, medical teams arrived through the tunnels within 30 minutes, guided by what Elena assumed were vampire allies in positions of authority. The victims were evacuated quickly and discreetly, with cover stories already being prepared to explain their disappearances and recovery. Elena found herself sitting on the stone steps outside the warehouse as dawn approached. The adrenaline from the battle was wearing off, leaving her exhausted but strangely exhilarated. She had fulfilled the prophecy, saved the city, and prevented a supernatural catastrophe that would have exposed the hidden world to human authorities. Alexander emerged from the warehouse and sat down beside her on the steps. In the growing daylight, Elena could see the toll the night's events had taken on him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his supernatural pallor was more pronounced than usual. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. Elena considered the question seriously. "Different," she said finally. "Like everything I thought I knew about the world has changed." Alexander nodded understandingly. "That's normal after your first major supernatural battle. The knowledge that there are forces beyond human comprehension operating in the shadows can be overwhelming." Elena turned to study his profile in the morning light. "What happens now? Do we go back to pretending we're enemies?" "Is that what you want?" Alexander asked, meeting her gaze with those ancient blue eyes. Elena felt her heart skip a beat. The attraction she felt toward Alexander was undeniable, but she wasn't naive about the complications involved. He was a vampire, older than her great-grandmother had been when she died. With trust, Teddy, any relationship between them would be fraught with difficulties. But she also couldn't deny what she had witnessed during the battle. Alexander and his family were protectors, not predators. They risked their lives to save innocent humans, and they had treated her as an equal partner rather than a liability. "I want to continue working with your family," Elena said carefully. "The shadow demons are gone, but there are other supernatural threats out there. My silver sight and your family's abilities complement each other." Alexander smiled, and Elena felt warmth spread through her chest. I was hoping you would say that. There's so much I could teach you about the supernatural world, and so much we could accomplish working together. Elena felt a flutter of excitement at the possibilities he was suggesting. What kind of things? Rogue vampires who prey on humans, demonic cults like the one we just defeated, supernatural creatures that most hunters can't even detect, Alexander explained. There's an entire shadow war being fought to protect innocent people from threats they never even know exist. The idea of becoming part of that hidden conflict was both terrifying and thrilling. Elena had grown up training to hunt supernatural creatures, but she had never imagined working alongside some of them to protect humanity from greater threats. Adrian Blackwood appeared in the warehouse doorway, looking tired but satisfied. The cleanup teams are finishing up inside. All evidence of the cult's activities has been removed, and the tunnel entrance is being sealed with protective wards. Alexander stood and helped Elena to her feet. Adrian, Elena has agreed to work with our family on future supernatural threats. Adrian smiled broadly, and Elena noticed that his fangs were still slightly extended from the night's exertions. We could use a hunter with the silver sight on our team. Elena realized she was being invited into something much larger than a simple alliance. The Blackwood family operated as a supernatural protection service, and they were offering her membership in their organization. There's one thing I need to understand, Elena said. The prophecy mentioned that my shot would either save or doom us all. How do we know I made the right choice? Alexander and Adrian exchanged a meaningful look before Alexander answered. The Shadowheart was only sleeping, not dead. If it had fully awakened, it would have been nearly impossible to destroy. By shattering it while it was still vulnerable, you prevented a catastrophe that could have consumed the entire region. Elena felt relief wash over her. The weight of the prophecy had been enormous, and knowing she had chosen correctly lifted a burden from her shoulders. Do children tebbit this tebbit? Besides, Adrian added with a grin, your great-grandmother's silver bullets knew truth from deception, remember? They guided you to the right target at the right moment. Elena touched the silver locket hanging around her neck, feeling connected to the generations of Martinez women who had protected innocent people from supernatural threats. She was part of something larger now, something that transcended the traditional boundaries between hunters and vampires. Over the following weeks, Elena began training with the Blackwood family to develop her supernatural combat skills. Alexander personally taught her advanced marksmanship techniques specifically designed for supernatural targets. Adrian worked with her on recognizing different types of supernatural creatures and understanding their weaknesses. Victoria helped her develop her silver sight into a more refined ability that could detect magical signatures from greater distances. The Chen siblings introduced her to the broader network of supernatural protectors operating throughout the city. Elena discovered that there were dozens of vampires, werewolves, witches, and even reformed demons working together to maintain the balance between the human and supernatural worlds. Elena's family initially struggled to accept her alliance with vampires, but Sofia Martinez eventually came to understand that Elena was following in Isabella's footsteps. The old woman even began sharing additional family secrets, including locations of supernatural artifacts that could be useful in future battles. 3 months after the destruction of the Shadowheart, Elena was patrolling the cemetery with Alexander when he suddenly stopped and turned to face her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "There's something I need to tell you," he said seriously. Elena felt a flutter of nervousness. They had grown closer during their training sessions and joint patrols, but Alexander had been careful to maintain professional boundaries. Elena sometimes caught him looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, but he had never acted on whatever attraction he might feel. "What is it?" she asked. Alexander seemed to struggle with his words before speaking. "The night you first saved our lives, when you fired those silver bullets at the Shadow Demon, something changed for me. I've lived for over 2 centuries without feeling anything approaching love, but you've awakened something in me that I thought was impossible." Elena's heart began racing as she realized what he was saying. "Alexander, I know the complications this creates," he continued quickly. "I know you're human and I'm not. and I know your family has spent generations hunting my kind. But I can't ignore what I feel for you any longer." Elena stepped closer to him, her silver sight showing her the truth of his emotions. There was no deception in his aura, no manipulation or predatory hunger. What she saw was genuine love, tinged with centuries of loneliness and hope for a future he had never imagined possible. "I feel it too," she admitted softly. "I've been trying to fight it because I know how impossible it seems, but I can't deny what's between us." Alexander reached out and gently touched her face, his supernatural strength carefully controlled. "Your great-grandmother's journal mentions that she loved a vampire once, but the timing was wrong and the world wasn't ready for such a relationship." Elena leaned into his touch, feeling the rightness of the moment. Maybe the world is ready now. Maybe that's part of what the prophecy meant, about salvation coming from unexpected sources. Alexander smiled and leaned down to kiss her. When their lips met, Elena felt a jolt of connection that went beyond physical attraction. It was as if their souls recognized each other, as if they had been destined to find each other across the centuries of conflict between their kinds. When they broke apart, Elena saw that Alexander's eyes were glowing with supernatural light. But instead of the predatory glow she had been taught to fear, his eyes shone with love and protectiveness. "The old alliances between our families were built on mutual respect and shared purpose," Alexander said quietly. "But what I'm offering you is something deeper than alliance. I'm offering you my heart, if you'll have it. With trust, Teddy." Elena smiled and pulled him down for another kiss. "I already have it," she said against his lips. "Just like you have mine." In the months that followed, Elena and Alexander became legendary among both the supernatural community and the hunting families for their effectiveness as partners. Combined with Alexander's centuries of experience, created a team capable of handling threats that neither could face alone. Their relationship challenged traditional assumptions about the conflict between hunters and vampires. Other hunting families began reaching out to establish their own alliances with vampire bloodlines that had chosen to protect rather than prey upon humans. Elena's family eventually gave their blessing to the relationship when they saw how happy she was and how effectively she and Alexander worked together. Sofia Martinez even joked that Isabella would be proud to know her great-granddaughter had found love with a vampire who treated her as an equal partner. The supernatural protection network expanded throughout the region, with Elena and Alexander serving as liaisons between human hunters and vampire protectors. They faced numerous threats together, from demonic incursions to rogue supernatural creatures, always fighting side by side to protect innocent lives. 2 years after their first meeting in Riverside Cemetery, Alexander proposed to Elena in the same location where she had first saved his life. The silver engagement ring he offered her had been crafted by vampire artisans and blessed by Martinez family magic. Elena accepted without hesitation, knowing that she had found not only love but her true purpose. She was no longer just a hunter or just a protector, but something new entirely. She was a bridge between worlds, a guardian who could see beyond ancient prejudices to the greater truth that some bonds transcend the boundaries between different kinds of people. Their wedding was attended by both human hunters and vampire protectors, officiated by Father Rodriguez, who had learned to bless unions that serve the greater good regardless of the supernatural nature of the participants. Elena wore her great-grandmother's silver locket as something old, carried her grandmother's blessed pistol as something borrowed, and exchanged vows with a vampire who had waited 2 centuries to find his soulmate. As Elena and Alexander stood together in the cathedral where generations of Martinez women had been blessed for their protection work, Elena realized that the prophecy had been fulfilled in ways no one had anticipated. Her silver shot had saved not only the city, but it opened a new chapter in the relationship between hunters and supernatural protectors. The fated deliverance the ancient texts had predicted wasn't just about destroying the Shadowheart. It was about delivering both their kinds from centuries of unnecessary conflict, creating new alliances built on love and mutual respect rather than fear and misunderstanding. Elena Martinez Blackwood became the first hunter to officially marry into a vampire bloodline. But she would not be the last. Her courage in following her heart and her silver sight had created a new future where the children of hunters and protectors could work together to guard the innocent from the real threats that lurked in the shadows. In the years that followed, as Elena and Alexander raised their adopted human children and continued their protection work, the silver locket that had once belonged to Isabella Martinez was passed down to a new generation. The cycle continued, but now it carried the hope of unity rather than the burden of ancient conflicts. Elena had taken a silver shot to protect Alexander's family line, but in doing so she had discovered that sometimes the greatest act of protection is opening your heart to love, even when that love seems impossible. The Vampire King had recognized her as his fated deliverance, but she had delivered him into something far greater than safety. She had delivered him into a love that would last for eternity.